Donovan Moretti built his criminal empire on absolute control, ruthlessness, and a total lack of mercy. Firing his clumsy new assistant was just another Tuesday. She was merely collateral damage. But 48 hours later, staring at his late father's last will and testament, Donovan realized the horrifying truth. He had just exiled the one woman who held the absolute keys to his entire kingdom. The penthouse office of Moretti Enterprises smelled of ozone, old money, and impending violence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Chicago skyline was a blurred canvas of slate gray and driving rain. Inside, the temperature felt 50 degrees colder. Donovan Moretti stood at the head of the long obsidian conference table. At 32, he was the undisputed head of the Moretti Syndicate, a man who had seamlessly transitioned his family's legacy of blood and contraband into legitimate high-rise real estate and global shipping. He wore a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that tailored perfectly to the broad, athletic frame of a man who had learned early that a knife in an alley was just as likely as a subpoena in a boardroom. Across the table sat Declan O'Connor, the notoriously hot-headed lieutenant of the city's Irish faction. Tension hung in the air, thick and volatile. A dispute over the Southside shipping docks was threatening to shatter a fragile 3-year truce. "You're asking for 30% of the dock revenues, Declan," Donovan said, his voice a low, lethal baritone that barely rose above a whisper. My father might have entertained that kind of extortion out of nostalgia for the old days. My father, however, is dead. Declan's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming against the polished table. Vittorio was a reasonable man. You're pushing too hard, Donovan. The docks are our territory. You route your steel and your unregistered cargo through there, we get a cut. You get 10%, or you get to explain to your boss why the Moretti family has decided to buy the local longshoremen union and lock you out entirely, Donovan replied, leaning forward, resting his knuckles on the glass. His dark, unforgiving eyes pinned Declan to his leather chair. Choose carefully. It was the critical moment, the precise second where the power dynamic shifted, where Donovan's sheer force of will was about to break the Irish lieutenant. And then the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open with a tragic, squeaking hesitation. Claire Montgomery stepped into the room, balancing a silver tray holding 3 porcelain espresso cups, a pitcher of cream, and a stack of highly classified financial ledgers that HR had blindly entrusted to her that morning. She was 24, chronically exhausted, and entirely out of her depth. Her conservative navy skirt suit was a size too big, bought from a thrift store just for this job. Dark circles bruised the skin under her emerald eyes, the result of staying up until 3 in the morning, working a second shift at a diner to pay for her younger sister's mounting medical bills. She had been hired exactly 4 days ago as an interim executive assistant, a role she was entirely unqualified for, handed to her by a sympathetic HR manager who had suddenly retired the next day. I have the updated manifests, Mr. Moretti, Claire stammered, her voice trembling as she felt the collective murderous gaze of 5 heavily armed men turn toward her. "Get out," Donovan snapped, not even looking at her. His focus remained laser-locked on Declan. But Claire was already in motion. Desperation made her clumsy. She hurried forward, terrified of failing the first real task she'd been given. They said it was urgent. The routing numbers for the offshore. "I said leave," Donovan barked, finally turning to face her, his patience snapping. Startled by the sheer venom in his voice, Claire flinched. The heel of her cheap pump caught the edge of the plush Persian rug. Time seemed to slow down as the silver tray tipped. The porcelain shattered against the obsidian table. Scalding hot espresso splashed directly across the open leather briefcase of Declan O'Connor, soaking his private documents, while the confidential Moretti offshore ledgers scattered wildly across the floor, fully exposing the syndicate's Cayman Island account numbers to the rival faction. The room went dead silent. Declan stared at his ruined briefcase, then at the scattered ledgers on the floor. A slow, malicious smirk spread across his face as he took in the sensitive financial data now openly displayed at his feet. "Well now," Declan purred, leaning back. "It looks like you can afford that 30% after all, Donovan. Or maybe I should just make a call to the SEC about these routing numbers." Donovan's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room plummeted to sub-zero. He looked at Declan. "Meeting's over. We'll discuss the 10% tomorrow." Declan chuckled, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Sure thing, boss. Thanks for the coffee." He stepped right over the mess and walked out, his bodyguards trailing behind him. Once the heavy doors clicked shut, Donovan slowly turned his gaze to the woman kneeling on the floor, frantically trying to wipe up espresso with a handful of napkins, her hands shaking violently. "Mr. Moretti, I am so sorry," Claire gasped, tears of sheer panic welling in her eyes. "I tripped. I didn't mean to. I'll reprint everything right now. I'll pay for the dry cleaning. Please." Donovan walked slowly around the table. He stood over her, casting a long, dark shadow. "Do you know what you just did?" he asked, his voice deathly calm. I spilled. You just cost my family a multi-million-dollar negotiation and exposed confidential logistics to a hostile syndicate," Donovan said, his tone devoid of any humanity. "Who hired you?" "Mrs. Gable in HR, sir. I'm the new temp. You are a liability," Donovan interrupted. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. The cold finality in his words was worse than a scream. "You have exactly 5 minutes to clear your desk, hand over your key card, and get out of my building. If I ever see your face on this property again, the security team will not be gentle." Claire scrambled onto her feet, clutching the ruined, coffee-stained ledgers to her chest. "Please, Mr. Moretti, I'm begging you. I need this job. My little sister is in the hospital. I have rent. I have bills. If I lose this salary, we have nothing. I'll work for half pay. I'll do whatever it takes." Donovan looked down at her. He saw the desperation, the wet eyes, the pale, shaking lips. But in his world, empathy was a weakness that got you killed. He felt nothing but irritation. He glanced at her security badge hanging from her lapel. Claire Montgomery. "I don't run a charity, Miss Montgomery. I run an empire," Donovan said coldly. 4 minutes. Claire stood frozen for a second, a tear finally spilling over her lashes and cutting a hot trail down her cheek. She realized, staring into his pitch-black eyes, that there was no soul left in this man to appeal to. Without another word, she turned and fled the boardroom. 15 minutes later, Claire was standing on the wet concrete of downtown Chicago. The rain was coming down in sheets, soaking through her thin jacket. She held a small cardboard box containing a picture of her sister, a cheap mug, and a handful of pens. She had no job, $12 in her checking account, and a sister who needed a synthetic valve replacement by the end of the month. Up in the penthouse, Donovan Moretti poured himself a glass of neat bourbon, completely erasing Claire Montgomery from his memory. She was a ghost. A speck of dust brushed off his shoulder. He had no idea that in exactly 2 days, that speck of dust would become the most powerful entity in his entire world. The mahogany-paneled conference room of the Arrington law firm smelled of lemon polish and ancient leather. It was a space designed for the quiet transfer of massive wealth. Rain lashed against the arched windows, a persistent drumming that matched the pounding headache behind Donovan's temples. It had been 3 weeks since his father, Vittorio Moretti, had died of a sudden, massive coronary. Vittorio had been a legend, a ruthless mob boss who had successfully legitimized 50% of the family's assets while keeping a lethal grip on the underworld. Donovan had spent the last 21 days securing power, squashing minor rebellions, and assuring the 5 families of the Midwest that the Moretti Syndicate was stronger than ever. Today was just a formality. The reading of the will. Donovan sat at the table with his inner circle, his consigliere, an older, sharp-eyed man named Albert, and his chief enforcer, a hulking shadow of a man named Luca. Across from them sat Thomas Arrington, a 60-year-old attorney who had guarded the Moretti family's darkest secrets for 3 decades. "Before we begin," Thomas said, adjusting his spectacles, "Vittorio wanted me to express that his final wishes were designed to protect the longevity of the family. He knew you were ready to lead, Donovan. But he also had debts of honor, things you were not privy to." Donovan took a slow sip of his water. "Just read it, Thomas. I have a sit-down with the gallows in 2 hours. Let's get the estate transferred." Thomas cleared his throat and broke the wax seal on the thick manila envelope. He began to read. For the first 20 minutes, everything went exactly as expected. Donovan inherited the sprawling family estate in the Hamptons, the penthouse in Chicago, the offshore accounts in Zurich and the Caymans, and absolute control over the family's illicit gambling and extortion rings. And now, regarding the crown jewel of the estate, Thomas murmured, his eyes scanning down the legal parchment. He seemed to hesitate, swallowing hard. "The ownership of Moretti Global Shipping." Donovan leaned forward slightly. This was the most crucial asset. Moretti Global Shipping wasn't just a legitimate billion-dollar logistics company. It was the essential front that allowed the syndicate to move unregistered weapons, cash, and contraband seamlessly across international borders. Whoever controlled the shipping routes controlled the underworld. "To my only son Donovan," Thomas read, his voice wavering slightly. "I leave 49% of the voting shares of Moretti Global Shipping alongside the title of CEO." Donovan froze. His eyes locked onto the lawyer. Albert, the consigliere, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. 49%? Donovan repeated, his voice dangerously low. "My father owned 100% of the private shares. Where is the controlling 51%? Thomas pulled at the collar of his shirt. He looked genuinely terrified. "The remaining 51%, the lawyer continued reading, rapidly now. "The controlling stake of the board, the ports, and all associated international logistics is hereby bequeathed to Miss Claire Montgomery." Silence dropped over the room like a physical weight. It was absolute, suffocating and deafening. Donovan just stared. His brain processed the words, but they made no logical sense. Claire Montgomery. The name echoed in his head, entirely out of context. "Who the hell is Claire Montgomery?" Albert asked, voicing the question that was tearing through Donovan's mind. "Is she a bastard daughter? A mistress?" "I don't know," Thomas admitted, holding up his hands defensively. "Vittorio came to me in secret 6 months ago and amended the will. He demanded it be ironclad. The shares are locked in a trust. They transfer to this woman immediately upon his death." Donovan's mind raced. Claire Montgomery. The name was so painfully familiar. Where had he heard it? A rival boss? A politician they had bought? And then, A vivid memory flashed behind his eyes. A silver tray tipping over, scalding espresso, a cheap navy skirt suit, trembling hands, a security badge dangling from a lapel. Miss Montgomery. Donovan's breath caught in his throat. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. The bumbling, weeping, pathetic temp assistant he had mercilessly fired and thrown out into the rain just 48 hours ago. She was Claire Montgomery. "You're telling me," Donovan said, his voice dropping an octave, shaking the crystal glasses on the table, "that my father gave the controlling interest of $1 billion smuggling front to an HR temp?" "Wait, you know her?" Albert asked, his eyes widening. "I fired her," Donovan breathed out, standing up so abruptly his heavy leather chair crashed to the floor. "2 days ago, I fired her, blacklisted her from the building, and had security throw her onto the street." Luca, the enforcer, crossed his massive arms. "Boss, if she holds 51%, she can legally freeze our logistics. We can't move the guns out of Miami. We can't move the cash through Genoa. If the other families find out a civilian girl owns the ports, they'll hunt her down," Donovan finished, his blood turning to ice. "If Carmine Gallo, or the Irish Syndicate, found out that the formidable Moretti Empire had a massive, glaring vulnerability in the form of a 24-year-old broke civilian, the race would begin. They wouldn't just try to kill her. They would kidnap her. They would torture her, force her to sign over the shares, or forcefully marry her into their family to legally absorb the ports. And Donovan had just kicked her out of his fortress, leaving her completely unprotected. "Is the will public yet?" Donovan demanded, rounding the table and grabbing Thomas by the lapels of his expensive suit. It gets filed with probate at noon today," Thomas choked out. Donovan looked at his Rolex. It was 11:45 a.m. In 15 minutes, every dirty cop, rival boss, and syndicate rat in Chicago would see the public filing. They would know the Moretti family didn't control their own shipping lines anymore. Donovan dropped the lawyer and spun toward Luca. "I need her found," Donovan barked, his eyes flashing with a violent, panicked energy. "Tear the city apart. Check her HR file. Find her address. Find her family. Find whatever rock she crawled under. You bring her to me, untouched, alive, and breathing. Do you understand?" "On it," Luca grunted, already pulling out his phone and sprinting for the door. Donovan stood breathing heavily in the silent boardroom. His father's ghost seemed to be laughing at him from the shadows. Vittorio had always warned him that his lack of mercy would be his undoing. Donovan had ignored him, believing ruthlessness was the only armor he needed. Now, his empire, his life, and his legacy rested entirely in the trembling hands of a girl he had crushed under his heel. Miles away, in a crumbling, drafty apartment in the South Side, Claire Montgomery hastily zipped up a cheap duffel bag. Her hands were shaking, not from spilled coffee this time, but from pure terror. Her apartment door had been kicked open. The deadbolt was hanging by a single screw. She had just managed to hide on the fire escape when 3 men in dark leather jackets tore through her living room, tossing her belongings, looking for something. They had spoken in heavy Italian accents. They had mentioned the Moretti ports. Claire didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know why terrifying men were looking for her, or why she had received a cryptic automated email that morning from a Swiss bank detailing an account with a balance that had too many zeros to comprehend. All she knew was that she had been fired by a monster, and now other monsters were trying to find her. She swung the duffel bag over her shoulder, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to get to the hospital. She had to grab her sister Lily, and they had to run. She didn't know where to go, but she knew one thing for certain. Staying in Chicago meant she was going to die. The fluorescent lights of Northwestern Memorial Hospital flickered ominously overhead as Claire Montgomery sprinted down the linoleum corridor of the pediatric cardiology wing. Her wet sneakers squeaked against the freshly waxed floors. Her lungs burned, and her vision blurred with unshed tears. She had to get to room 412. She had to get Lily out. Claire did not know who the men ransacking her apartment were, but she knew the terrifying look in their eyes. It was the look of men who did not leave witnesses. Bursting through the heavy wooden door of room 412, Claire found her 10-year-old sister sitting up in bed, drawing in a sketchbook. Lily looked terribly small amidst the sterile white sheets and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitors. Her pale skin and the dark circles under her eyes mirrored Claire's own exhaustion, but Lily's smile was bright. "Claire, you're soaked," Lily said, putting her crayon down. "Is your shift over already?" "We have to go, Bug," Claire said, her voice shaking violently as she practically tore the closet door open, grabbing Lily's meager belongings and shoving them into the duffel bag. "Right now, get your coat." Lily's smile vanished, replaced by the instinctual panic of a child who had grown up in poverty and instability. "What's wrong? Are we being evicted again? Claire, my IV line." "I'll take the IV out safely. Just please, put your coat on," Claire pleaded, her hands trembling as she approached the medical equipment. Before Claire's fingers could even brush the plastic tubing, the hospital room door clicked shut. The metallic sound of the heavy deadbolt sliding into place echoed like a gunshot. Claire spun around, her blood turning to ice. Standing in front of the door were two massive men in tailored navy suits. They were entirely out of place in the pediatric ward. One of them, a man with a jagged scar cutting across his left eyebrow, calmly pulled a suppressed pistol from beneath his jacket, keeping it hidden from the hallway window, but perfectly visible to Claire. "Miss Montgomery," the scarred man said, his voice a thick, gravelly rasp laced with a heavy Chicago accent. "Carmine Gallo sends his regards. You're coming with us, both of you." Claire instinctively stepped in front of Lily, shielding her sister's frail body with her own. "I don't know who you are. I don't have any money. Please. She's sick. She needs a new heart valve. Just let her stay here." The man smirked, stepping closer. "We don't want your money, sweetheart. We want the shipping ports. Now you can walk out of here quietly, or I can put a bullet in your kneecap and drag you out. The kid comes either way to make sure you sign the papers." Claire closed her eyes. A terrifying, paralyzing despair washed over her. She was a nobody. She was just a fired temp from an HR department. This had to be a colossal mistake, but she was going to die for it anyway. Suddenly, the glass window overlooking the hallway shattered inward with a deafening crash. The scarred man barely had time to turn his head before a massive hand reached through the broken glass, grabbed him by the throat, and slammed his skull brutally against the steel doorframe. The man crumpled instantly. The second Gallo thug raised his weapon, but the hospital room door was kicked completely off its hinges, flying inward and striking the gunman in the chest. Stepping through the shattered wreckage of the doorway was Donovan Moretti. He looked like a demon summoned straight from the underworld. His charcoal suit was soaked from the rain, his dark hair slicked back, and his eyes burned with a terrifying, lethal rage. In his right hand, he held a matte black Sig Sauer, leveled perfectly at the second gunman's head. "Drop it," Donovan commanded, his voice vibrating with absolute authority. The Gallo thug hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was a fatal mistake. Donovan fired twice. The silenced shots made a sharp thwip-thwip sound, and the gunman dropped to the floor, completely immobilized. Claire let out a stifled scream, covering Lily's eyes and pressing the little girl's face into her stomach. She was shaking so hard, she could barely stand. The man who had mercilessly fired her 2 days ago was now standing in her sister's hospital room, executing people. Donovan lowered his weapon, his cold eyes snapping to Claire. He took in her terrified, soaked appearance and the frail child clutching her waist. For a microscopic second, something resembling regret flashed across his hardened features. "Are you hurt?" Donovan demanded, stepping over the unconscious bodies. "Stay away from us," Claire screamed, grabbing a metal bedpan to use as a weapon. "You fired me. You ruined my life. Why are you here? Who are these people?" "Those people are the Gallo crime family, and they want to capture you because, as of 2 hours ago, you own 51% of my international shipping empire," Donovan snapped, grabbing her wrist and forcefully lowering the bedpan. "My father left it to you in his will. You are the most valuable target in Chicago right now, and if we don't leave this hospital in 30 seconds, more of them will come, and your sister will die in the crossfire." Claire stared at him, her brain short-circuiting. Your father?" "We do not have time for a corporate orientation, Miss Montgomery," Donovan said, signaling to the hallway. A hulking shadow named Luca stepped into the room, sweeping the perimeter. "Luca, take the girl. Safely. Treat her like glass." "Don't touch her!" Claire cried, but Luca had already gently scooped Lily into his massive arms, wrapping his large leather jacket around her to hide the IV port. "You can either trust the man who fired you, or you can wait for the men who want to kill you," Donovan said, grabbing Claire's hand with a surprisingly firm, warm grip. "Run!" They fled through the hospital's maintenance corridors, bypassing the panicked nurses and security guards responding to the commotion. Out in the pouring rain of the loading dock, a black armored SUV was waiting, engine roaring. Donovan shoved Claire into the back seat, sliding in right beside her as Luca secured Lily and jumped into the driver's seat. Tires squealed against wet asphalt as the SUV tore away from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, plunging into the dark, chaotic arteries of the Chicago underworld. The safe house was a sprawling, subterranean bunker, hidden beneath a legitimate steel manufacturing plant on the edge of Lake Michigan. It was furnished like a luxury penthouse, contrasting sharply with the concrete walls and reinforced steel blast doors. Claire sat on a velvet sofa, a thick wool blanket wrapped around her trembling shoulders. Lily had been safely tucked into a guest bedroom down the hall, monitored by an on-call private physician Donovan had summoned with a single phone call. Across a heavy mahogany coffee table, Donovan sat in a leather armchair, a glass of amber bourbon resting in his hand. He had discarded his ruined suit jacket, the sleeves of his white dress shirt rolled up to reveal dark ink sprawling across his forearms. "My father, Vittorio Moretti, was a man of strict codes," Donovan began, breaking the heavy silence. His voice was calmer now, lacking the venom from the boardroom 2 days prior. He believed in debts of blood, and he owed a massive one to a man named Arthur Montgomery. Claire's head snapped up, her emerald eyes widening. "My father?" Donovan nodded slowly. 20 years ago, my father's empire was almost dismantled by a federal RICO case. They had ledgers, wiretaps, and a witness. Arthur Montgomery was my father's lead forensic accountant. He wasn't a gangster. He was just a brilliant numbers guy trying to pay off his wife's medical debt. Claire swallowed hard, memories of her late father's gentle smile flashing in her mind. He had died in a federal penitentiary when she was just 14. Arthur scrubbed the ledgers. Donovan continued softly. He took the fall. He pled guilty to embezzlement and wire fraud, completely shielding my father from the indictment. He died in prison, so my father could remain a free man and build the empire I sit on today. Vittorio promised Arthur he would look after his family. But Arthur, being a proud man, refused dirty money. He demanded his daughters be kept far away from the mob. So we suffered, Claire whispered, anger finally piercing through her fear. We starved. My mother worked herself into an early grave, and my father died in a cage. And your father just watched? My father respected Arthur's wishes while he lived, but upon his death, Vittorio made sure the debt was paid, Donovan said, gesturing to a thick stack of legal documents resting on the coffee table. He placed the controlling shares of the shipping routes into a blind trust, heavily fortified by the Arrington law firm. Those routes legitimize billions of dollars. And now they belong legally to you. Claire stared at the documents. It was absurd. She was holding the reins of the most dangerous criminal enterprise in the Midwest. The Gallo family knows, Donovan said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The Irish syndicate knows. By morning, every cartel from here to Montreal will know a civilian holds the keys to the kingdom. They will hunt you, Claire. They will leverage Lily. They will not stop until you sign those shares over, or you are dead. Then I'll sign them over to you, Claire said immediately, reaching for a pen. Take them. I don't want them. I just want my sister to be safe. Donovan's jaw tightened. It's not that simple. The trust is ironclad. My father's lawyers anticipated coercion. You cannot sell, gift, or transfer the shares for a minimum of 5 years. If you die, the shares dissolve, and the shipping ports revert to federal auction. It was Vittorio's final fail-safe to force us together. Claire's hand hovered over the paper. Force us together. There is only one legal loophole in the trust, Donovan said, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intense, burning heat. The shares can be co-managed and legally protected by a spouse. If we are married, the Moretti family retains legal, lethal jurisdiction over your assets. The other syndicates will back off, knowing an attack on my wife is a declaration of total war. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to spin. You want me to marry you? The man who humiliated me, who threw me onto the street? I'm a monster, Claire. I don't deny it, Donovan stated, completely unapologetic. But right now, I am the only monster capable of keeping you and your sister alive. If you walk out that door, you won't last until sunrise. You won't last until... Claire looked at the man across from her. He was arrogant, ruthless, and terrifying. But he had also saved her sister's life without a second thought. She thought of Lily, sleeping safely in the next room. She thought of the medical bills, the eviction notices, the constant suffocating fear of poverty. She was no longer the bumbling temp who spilled coffee. She was Arthur Montgomery's daughter, and she suddenly held all the cards. Claire slowly leaned back against the velvet sofa, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. The terrified girl vanished, replaced by a steel resolve that genuinely surprised the Mafia boss sitting across from her. Fine. I'll marry you, Donovan, Claire said, her voice completely steady, devoid of any fear. But this isn't a rescue. This is a negotiation. I keep the 51%. You will pay for Lily's surgery at the best hospital in the country tomorrow morning. You will never raise your voice to me again. And when this 5-year trust expires, I walk away with half the legitimate profits." Donovan stared at her, genuinely stunned by her audacity. For the first time in his life, someone had looked the devil in the eye and demanded a better deal. A slow, dark, and dangerously genuine smile spread across his face. "Deal, Miss Montgomery," Donovan whispered, raising his bourbon glass to her. "Welcome to the family. If you enjoyed this thrilling Mafia romance and the shocking twists of Donovan and Claire's dangerous journey, please do not forget to hit that like button. Share this exciting story with your friends who love intense, high-stakes drama, and make absolutely sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping, real-life inspired tales of power, betrayal, and unexpected romance. Your continued support helps us create more incredible videos every single week. Drop a comment below on what you think happens next.